our questions are not going to be used. We're going to cut ourselves out. So, if in general, when you're answering, would you make sort of specific references to details, rather than saying, well, it was a great building? You might say, well, the field house was a great building, or you know what I'm saying? We need, rather than expletives, we need the know.
Okay, we're ready. So you were telling us about how the field house came to be built. Why don't you just start again and describe that?
Yes, the Muncie Field House was built at the height of the boom before the stock crash in 1929, and bonds were sold, and there was no particular problem in selling them. But right after the crash in 1929 and depression in 1930, why the bonds were one of the few bonds that actually, as I recall, were not defaulted, but it was very difficult to keep up the payments and keep up the interest on them. I was asked to serve on the Board of Trustees following the death of one of the members after I'd come back, and of course had a long-standing interest before that in athletics, and not only in Muncie but elsewhere, and was delighted to serve on the Board of Trustees and have an opportunity to participate in a small way in activities that went on the field house. It was, as we've discussed, I'm sure it was one of the largest field houses in the Midwest, certainly in the state of Indiana at that time. Some of the universities might have been larger, but as far as high schools were concerned, it was the largest. I think perhaps still is. I've forgotten what the exact seating capacity was, but it was written up in a good many different newspapers in this part of the country. And when Muncie won its first state championship, of course, this added tremendous interest to the field house and drew the crowds, and the regionals and sectional tournaments that were held there helped tremendously with its keeping its financial obligations, taking care of the bonds and the interest and so forth. As time went on, I think this being a focal point of community interest had been diluted by other activities and other interests, but all these years, 40 years more now, I guess perhaps actually longer than that, it has been a focal point here in Muncie. And although there are other high schools here, compete fiercely to win the local championships, but when one of the teams finally wins out, it seems that they all sort of follow in behind, and the community supports the winning team.
Excuse me, I need another battery.
Factor, even a minor factor in the local economy. Well, it must have an effect on the school system. I mean, it must be so many. I mean, there's some 7,500 seats per game available, and there's standing room only.
Well, I think it does. I have no idea how much the income from the Muncie Fieldhouse has to do with the finances of the city schools. I'm sure it's self-supporting, and it supports many of the athletic programs. They do have other activities there. I think that they have fundraising activities. The YMCA, for example, has had the Globetrotters there from time to time to help raise funds for support of some of their programs. You perhaps know about the community sing, which is a rather unique event here in Muncie, I believe, that started a good many years ago. And all the city schools, their choruses and all different groups, the lady groups and the barbershop quartets and so forth get together there and sing Christmas carols, and it really is a community activity, which I think is quite unique in what it does for this area. And there's another activity of the field house that the city points to with pride. It brings people here, brings people into the stores and downtown, and it's difficult to put any dollar value on things of this kind, but I'm quite sure that that they are very important to the community, not only in its from the financial point of view, but probably even more importantly from the community spirit, community kind of togetherness, perhaps.
Where does that come from?
The
The community spirit, that sense of togetherness.
It's hard to tell where the community spirit comes from. I think that perhaps Muncie is known as a basketball town, and even before that, it was the days of the gas boom that was known as a gas boom community, and then it was the Magic City, and different things like this always had some kind of a slogan, it seems to me. And then it went through this period of the Muncie Bearcats, and even after the Muncie Bearcats, or Muncie Central High School was divided up into other high schools and diluted the attention, particularly on the Muncie Bearcats, that still has kept the reputation, which the community is rather proud of, being home of, I believe, 7 state championships. And of course a good many of the players from Muncie have gone on and have played in colleges and universities throughout the country and been star performers, and some have gone on into professional basketball. So it has been an important part of the community life way back from the early 20s right on up to today.
Do you think there's a sort of a network for champion basketball players in this area of the state, and specifically the area?
I think that people have thought of there being kind of a feeder system, feeding younger basketball players or younger athletes into certain high schools. And certainly when there was only one high school here in Muncie, they all came from the grade schools and the junior highs, and they all went to Muncie Central, which is of course Muncie Bearcats. As I said before, this has been diluted a good deal by the building of these other schools, South Side, North Side, and of course Burris now is getting more attendance out there from various parts of various areas of the community. And I think they do kind of develop their feeder system, although perhaps it's not structured as formally as it might sound. There's a trend of certain schools to send their students on to certain high schools. They come out of certain sections of the city, of course, and I think some of them have the younger students have their idols, and they sort of follow them on into the high school of their choice. And I think you find families, I can't name any of them offhand, but there are families of athletes that have gone on through school. You see the same names repeated on the rosters of different teams. Even some of them go back to their fathers, and I suspect if you went back far enough, you might find a few grandfathers out rooting for their grandchildren who were playing on the same teams that they did. So I think it's not really a structured feeder system, I think, but it's one that has kind of grown in the community more by tradition and personal interest than anything else.
Well, do you think that the general, and in this community, excellent basketball player, because everybody seems to play, or at least play, if not basketball, some organized athletic event. It's pretty interesting how organized it is. Do you think that the young people who come through that system of basketball training successfully have an advantage in getting employment locally after their athletic careers?
I'm really not aware of any of the athletes getting any particular preference in the community employment-wise. I've known of some of them who have gone on into business, into industry, and so forth. Bud Brown here in Muncie was one of the stars a number of years ago, and in the Basketball Hall of Fame in Indiana, and of course he now has his own brokerage firm here in Muncie, and there are a number of businessmen here who one time or another played on the Muncie Bearcats or Burris or one of the other teams. I'm really not aware of any that have been selected or given jobs, particularly because of their athletic abilities. Many years ago, even before the time of the ascendancy of the Muncie Bearcats, there was a very active basketball league in Muncie, the Industrial Basketball League, and Ball Brothers and Warner Gear and different companies had teams that really had some excellent teams, excellent players, and some of those came from out of high school, and perhaps in the earlier days when these teams were active, some of them might have been sort of recruited to help out the factory team, but this was short duration. There was also at the YMCA, Herb Pettyjohn was long-time secretary of the Muncie YMCA, and again, before the time of the Muncie Bearcats, he had what known as the Muncie Midgets, and he won a good many state championships, and perhaps if we looked for the real beginning of interest in Muncie, perhaps we go back to H.A. Pettyjohn, who was a longtime secretary of the YMCA, who started say the Muncie Midgets, who won state championship after state championship, and many of those players actually moved on into college and became stars in college basketball teams.
Excuse me, are you okay?
Yeah. We're starting to be very constant.
Just the train is here.
Oh, I see. I was so concentrating on what you were saying, I
Oh.
didn't hear the
Oh.
I have a question.
Sorry.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
sure.
I was wondering, Mr. Wall, you're probably sort of uniquely situated, having been in the town for some generations and being a businessman. You must think about the future of Muncie. And I wondered if you could tell us what's in store for Muncie in the next couple of decades, from your perspective.
Well, I'm not very good at looking ahead, I'm afraid. A couple of decades, I don't think anybody can really do that. But I think Muncie will always be a good community. It has a good balance here of industry and of the academic with the university here, has a fine hospital with an excellent staff of doctors, physicians, surgeons, and has a large area hospital. I think that Muncie will be always be an area community for shopping and for professions. It'll be a financial center for this part of the state, I believe, with the 4 banks and the building and loan associations and the other financial institutions here. I think this will grow. Of course, our company, Ball Corporation, has its headquarters here, and I suspect that there will be more. Overmeyer Mold, formerly in Winchester, located with their plants in Winchester, have their headquarters here in Muncie, and I would look for Muncie to become the headquarters for many more corporations. Maxim is another company. It really is international, has its headquarters here, and with all the community activities that we have through Ball State University, as I mentioned, the medical profession, medical facilities here, the legal profession, which is well represented here, have some fine law firms, excellent financial institutions that Muncie will continue to attract headquarters, offices. Whether we'll get more industry in here, I'm not so sure. Muncie's lost some of the attractions that it did have as an industrial center with the decline of the railroads and, of course, the loss of gas, which brought the industry here originally. But I look for it to grow more in the areas of services, really, I think, than I do in the industrial fields.
How about the basketball team and the basketball spirit? Do you think that's liable to peter out, or do you think it'll go on?
I think the basketball spirit will stay in one way or another. It'll be diluted, of course. Back in days that I was talking about earlier, we didn't have television, we didn't even have radio in those days. And it was really a source of entertainment and community activity that I don't think you'll see the concentration on it that we had in the past, but I think it'll continue. There's enough of it born and bred here in Muncie and in Indiana, as far as that goes, that I think basketball will be important to this community and the state of Indiana, as far as I can see ahead anyway. I don't see any reason for it to decline. It will only be, I think, a part of a more diversified community activity than we had in the past, those 40, 50 years ago.
About the black community here, is that becoming more integrated into the rest of Muncie, or is it separate? How has that changed over the years?
It has changed some, I think. It's still
Tape runner.
it's a good time to run out.
20 minutes, yeah.
Wow, that went fast. Would you like to continue a little bit?
Tell her to come on, if she wants to go, ask her to come on down to the office. Meet me down here.
Good. Good of you to ask.
Well, did she?
It's a pleasure.
If the gentleman there.
Okay, is that well?
We were talking about the black community and the changes that might have come about.
Well, I think there have been changes in the black community, obviously, over the years, as there have been in most all communities. I think there are efforts on both blacks and the whites to become more integrated and work together better and understand each other's problems better than they did a number of years ago. Still, there is a good deal of separation in the living areas. The black community seems to stick pretty much in the areas where it has been since the beginning, I guess, in widely in industrial areas. However, there are a number of black families who are moving into other areas in the community as they become more active in the affairs of the university, for example, hospital, and so forth. Makes it more convenient for them to live in other parts of the community. The schools are not certainly not as segregated as they used to be. I don't know whether they were intentionally segregated or just happened to be because of the locale or because of the communities or where the populations are located. But I think that all the schools in Muncie, as far as I know, have a mingling of blacks and whites, and I think they get along pretty well. We don't have violence that a lot of communities have, fortunately. We've had some excellent black leaders in the community and do now. And I think there's a greater acceptance of each other. I don't think there's the strong feelings that there used to be. I think Muncie, like all communities, used to be sort of very strongly fragmented. I remember far enough back when perhaps the Jewish community and Catholic community were almost segregated as much perhaps as the blacks. Our plant, when I came to work here back in 1928, we had black foremen in the plant. I don't know that was unique in the community, but there was no feeling there of any. There was certainly no animosity between the groups that I was ever aware of. They lived in a different part of the community, but and we had different social activities and so forth. But as far as working together, I don't think that there was any real feeling about it. I think that now there's even less feeling. It's perfectly natural, perfectly acceptable for blacks and whites to be working side by side in plants and various jobs and clerks and in the offices and so forth. I don't think there's any feeling about it. I think I think all this has been a tremendous improvement.
Well, even basketball is integrated too.
Basketball is integrated. I think the black athletes pretty well control the basketball situation now. It's more of a rarity to see the whites playing on some of these teams now. Blacks have tremendous athletic abilities, and they are certainly making the most of it, and this is what they should do.
Among the things we're doing is to go to the basketball game this coming Friday between Anderson
Oh, yes.
and Muncie Central.
Should
you have a pick?
I haven't had an opportunity to follow the basketball this year, so I would have a favorite, but I'm not sure which one I'd be betting on if I was betting as to who's going to be the winner. It's always been a tough rivalry, Anderson and Muncie, and it's always a good game. I think it's obvious which who I'd be rooting for, however. I hope you enjoy the game.
Why are you for the Bearcats?
Well, I suppose it's obvious. It's civic pride and interest in what's going on in the community. It's like we like to see any activity in the community be successful. I think basketball is a community activity, and we like to see them be winners.
Just one final question. Do you think basketball breeds any sort of character into your youngsters?
I think basketball, I think any sport breeds character into the youngsters that play, and we haven't commented at all on the coaches over the years, except I did talk a little bit about H.A. Pettyjohn with his Muncie Midgets. Certainly he had a tremendous effect on the lives of the boys that played under him. And earlier we were talking about Pete Jolly. I guess you said he's up in his 80s now, but Pete Jolly had a tremendous effect on the young men that played with him. And I think the coaches have they always play a tremendous part in the development of the young men, and that's part of their job, and they're selected for that. I don't think there's any question but what the young folks, and now of course girls are just as active in sports as the boys are, and I think they all learn a lot about life and about the importance of winning. But if you have to lose, why lose with character, and to learn that that's what life is. You can't win them all, but do the best you can always. I think these are some of the things that are important to learn from any team or sport activity.
Do you have any closing opinion about a poor loser?
Well, you hear a lot of commentaries about poor losers or being too good a loser. You don't want to be too good a loser. And I'm trying to, I want to paraphrase some of the famous remarks that some of the coaches have made, but I say you can't win all of them, and you have to accept that you're going to have some defeats and disappointments, and you have to learn to roll with them and come out and try to win the next one. I think it's a pretty good introduction to the kind of life that you're going to have to lead when you get into the field of business, industry, profession, whatever you do. That's the way life is. You could philosophize on that for a long time, but I think there's been enough of that done by the professionals. Well, do you have anything else?
I don't.
Nope, thanks very much.
I want to thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well.